The next alternative as a setup to a high head inside single leg takedown or attack is a drag. As we discussed earlier, as far as our drags in the first module, depending upon where you get your drag from, and for right now, we're just going to do it from an inside tie. As I drag, and again, in brief review, I need to keep a short circle towards the wrist. I want to grab up high on Colby's tricep here, almost up to his shoulder, as opposed to down lower. I'm going to have a tendency in reality to slip down somewhat anyway. So I want to start out as high as I can. This movement and this movement need to be almost simultaneous. There cannot be a lot of time between this movement and this movement. When I drag, it's a little different now than the double leg. Remember, in the double leg, I sag in this position. I'm not going to go quite so low, and I'm going to concentrate a little bit more on trying to get this arm across. And you'll notice as I do that, I'm still trying to put the weight from the drag initially to his far leg, the leg that I want him to have his weight on, so this leg will come up fairly easily. I'm going to push my weight and my head and my shoulder into him so that I'm not going to be picking this leg up so much as just palming it from behind and securing it gently. And then my momentum and my weight will shift his weight. This leg will come up easily, and I'll be able to secure it. In brief review here, as I'm dragging, I want to lower my level slightly. I'm not going to lower it quite as much as I did at my double leg or when I attacked my double. And as I drag as well, I want to keep my head and my shoulder position fairly high in Colby's side here, up almost towards his underarm almost. So as I drag from here, I'm going to come down here. I'm pushing, I'm driving in this direction at an angle. In other words, if there was a line here, I'm driving across this line to be able to pick up this leg by transferring the weight to the far leg. Drag, push, transfer. Now, if your opponent is quick or wises up to that type of technique and pulls his leg back, or more specifically, is quick and so pulls his arm back, you can attack a single to the opposite side. So, just as before, I'm going to drag on this side, and I'll do this slow initially. I'm dragging here. Colby's responding by pulling his leg back and also pulling his arm back. Now, this foot that's behind is going to go at an angle to attack the single. My attack is basically the same as it was before. I've just changed sides. And instead of stepping with my front foot to get the single, I'm stepping with my rear foot. And I also have to notice, if you notice too, I'm kind of changing the angle of my body somewhat. The attack is basically the same though. I'm simply responding to him taking his arm away. So I drag, he pulls back, and I drive in. You'll notice when I do come in, and we'll review this in a little bit as far as with some of the finishes. On this technique in particular, I'm really pushing with my head to help finish. And we'll go over that basic concept in terms of finishing shortly. Another setup that's fairly unique to a single leg, I think, and one that I like using and I've had some success with but isn't particularly popular, is a foot sweep to a single leg. The situation I find that I can be successful to attack that type of single leg takedown is when I'm tied up, most typically, because at that point I'm controlling my opponent's limbs, so I know where they are, and it's a little bit more difficult for him to be grabbing at mine. However, the other situation I get that in is sometimes when we're open here, and I notice that my opponent starts to shift his weight back and takes his weight off the front foot. And we'll be going over both of those. First though, from the tie-up position, and this would be, for example, tying up here. I might be trying drags, popping the head, and then what I'll typically do is try to push his weight back a little and I skip in and I pop the foot. When I pop the foot, I bring my arm down, and I bring the arm down that's going to cup behind his leg because I know he's going to be bringing that leg back, and it's at that point I'm going to attack and grab the leg. So from here, let me pop him here. You'll notice the principle is the same. Once I've swept his leg and that foot is up in the air, where is his weight? Well, by definition, it all has to, presuming he's still standing up, it all has to be on this leg here. So I'm going to try to rush him at that point so that his center of gravity is not inside the supporting foot, but over the foot or even slightly outside as I transition to the single here. And I find that this works pretty well. Again, it's not a particularly popular type technique, but my point is you can use your feet to be able to either aggravate your opponent or actually have a formal setup. Now sometimes with my opponents, if we're just in this position here, we're not really making a whole lot of contact, but I'm also watching how he's stepping. As he's moving, typically, as we move, the weight needs to transfer from one foot to the other. And so I try to be sensitive to where my partner or my opponent's weight is. And as he's moving around, I'm going to attack in. I'm just going to give it a boom, and just a quick pop. Notice too, I don't kick his leg so much parallel or towards his other leg. It gets kicked out at an angle. So I'm moving around in here. I'm seeing Colby move around. Then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pop in here. Again, I always come in with my rear arm, the arm towards the rear of his leg, because reality is he's going to recover that leg very quickly. So I want him to recover it into my palm so that I can continue securing that leg as I continue to push his weight to the far leg. Now, that is again a technique that I like and I use. It's not a main setup, but my point being, particularly if I'm really working hard, hand fighting, working on the head in here, a lot of times your opponent loses track of what can be going on down below because I've got his attention up high. And typically too, I can manipulate his weight as I'm working on his head, his shoulders, hand fighting, to where I can see when his weight goes to that far leg. And that gives me an opportunity, because as soon as that weight's on the far leg, there's nothing to kick that out. So again, this isn't a main setup that I use to get a single leg, but I do find it useful as I'm doing other things. I see this open up fairly frequently with people, and then I'm able to sweep that leg out to secure a single. Next, another approach to attack a single is simply to feign the single, watch your partner or your opponent's response, and then as they're regaining their position, make your attack in force. So for example, I'm preparing to attack my single. I want to make a movement enough to get Colby to respond. And then right as he's recovering, after he pulls back, right as he's recovering and coming back to regain his position, that's when I want to attack. Generally speaking, and we had talked about this a little bit in an earlier module, an appropriate time for me to attack or grab Colby's front leg, if he's stepping, is when he's stepping down. So if he's stepping forward, on that excursion down, once he lifts this foot up, it's on an upward trajectory, And once he starts coming down, his weight is typically past where this rear foot can support him. So he has to come down before he can respond again and defend. And it's at that point that's the best time for me to attack, right as he's coming down. If he's lifting up, he can pull it back. But as soon as he gets to that point in that step where he's rounded the sort of the top of that curve and he's coming down, he can do nothing with this front leg until he makes contact with the mat to be able to pull it back. And so my choice is to try to time it and to attack as he's stepping forward, but not just forward, after he gets past that top part of the arc and is coming down. The last thing I'm going to show is to get in from no setup at all, but just to keep a good compact stance, anticipating that your opponent or partner is going to tie up with you. These aren't all the possible setups, there are many more, but this ought to at least get you started. So, in this final preparation to attack a single, we're going to use that notion that as I tend to get close to Colby, close enough for him to make contact, he's generally going to tie up with me. And that's a custom that we kind of all do pretty much without thinking. So I'm going to anticipate that. And as he's reaching, tie up, that's when I'm going to make my attack. The other thing to think about in that type of position is, again, if my opponent now is stalking me, when do I want to attack him? I want to attack him right as he's coming down on this foot. So if I'm circling or if he's moving towards me, it's attack, attack, attack. It's each time he moves that front foot forward, that's when I want to be attacking as it's on its excursion downward. So for example, if Colby is coming after me, I want to come into him right as soon as he's taking that step again, when he's coming down from the top of that arc.